Enter the building until you're told it is safe to do so. Please switch off all mobile phones or turn them to silent. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you'll be deemed by the council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this room, you're also consenting to being filmed by the council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and/or training purposes. The council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. Finally, can members and officers please ensure that you press the microphone for speaking and turn it off when you have finished. Before I move to the agenda, the Deputy Monitoring Officer would like to address the Council.
Thank you, Chair. I thought this would be an opportune moment to speak to councillors with regards to the forthcoming extraordinary council meeting on the 22nd of October, where the proposal for this council's name change will be debated. And for the avoidance of any doubt, I just wanted to clarify the rules around predisposition and predetermination. The legislation sets out that a decision maker is not to have a closed mind just because the decision maker has previously done anything relevant to that decision that directly or indirectly indicated what view the decision maker took or would or might take in relation to that matter. However, if the member has used strong language in support of their view, then the legal position is that the member has approached the decision with a closed mind and therefore should not take part in that decision, as this could affect the validity of that decision. I therefore urge all members to exercise caution when making any comments on this proposal ahead of the meeting, avoiding any strong statements, and to ensure that when you discuss this report at the extraordinary meeting, that you approach it with an open mind. Thank you.
Can I move on to the agenda, please? Item 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. I have received apologies so far from Councillors Busby, Holt and Nunn.
Have you any other apologies? Thank you. Councillor Lindsay.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Rick Hardacre sends his apologies.
Thank you. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Councillor Adrian Osborne sends his apologies. He chairs the Suffolk Association of Local Councils, and they've got an award evening tonight, and I think several councillors would be quite pleased after the evening to get some news. So he does give his apologies. Thank you.
Declaration of interest by councillors. Are there any declarations? Thank you. BC 1915, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 23rd July 2019 for accuracy only. Are there any issues with accuracy? Any comments? Fine. Could I have a proposer then for the... Thank you, Councillor Beer. And a seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Ward. All those in favour, please show your hands.
That's unanimous.
That's unanimous. Thank you. Item 4, BC 1916, announcements from the Chairman and Leader. I refer you to paper BC 1916 for noting. I'd also like to highlight something that's going on in Hadley on the 5th of October. Hadley on Show is going to be a very large community event which I'll be opening as chairman, and I'm on the committee. I would like to invite all members along to this event, if you're able to come. We'd be delighted to welcome you. So thank you for that opportunity. Councillor Ward, have you anything to report?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. I know that there is often a lot of criticism about what this council does, much of it unfair. But we do often get things right and go above and beyond in order to do things for our communities. And so I'd like to let you know about 3 recent success stories. On Saturday, 7th of September, the first ever Sudbury Silk Festival was held to showcase this important industry for Sudbury, the largest silk centre in the UK. The centrepiece of this was the Silk Stories film, produced by a team led by Babergh. This had a private showing the previous evening for an invited audience, including many of the workers in the industry and who took part in the film. And Councillor Davis and I were there to represent the council. The film was an excellent production, and I must give my thanks to all involved. The weaving companies, Gainsborough's House, Sudbury Town Council, Sudbury Library, but particularly to the project team, led by Zoe Banthorpe and Carol Creasy, and to the film producer Paul Press. We were also lucky to have had the expertise of a talented young professional filmmaker, Councillor Newman's son, Dan, who, with help from pupils from the Thomas Gainsborough School and Ormiston Academy, created a very informative and interesting film. Councillors Beer and Grandon recently hosted the Sudbury branch of the Royal Air Force Association here at Endeavour House, giving them a tour of the building and arranging for some of our officers to give a presentation of the planning process, showing how democracy works at a local level. The president of the branch has written a very grateful letter of thanks for what was a very enjoyable and informative visit. The free swimming for under-17s in Sudbury and Hadley over the summer holiday period has been a great success. 12% of under-17s in the district registered, 1,525 registered in Sudbury, and there were 3,288 attendances. In Hadley, there were 393 registrations and 1,205 attendances. There is money remaining which will be used to run the programme at half-term. This really is a great testament to the hard work of Councillor Davis, Cassandra Clements and others in the team, and also Abby Croft-Leisure for working with us on this. A couple of other points. I've been asked by officers to remind everyone that equality and diversity training courses are being run. To date, the uptake has been disappointing, and there are plenty of spaces on the next one on Monday the 30th of September at 2:30, so please do take advantage of this. And finally, on a more sombre note, I am sorry to announce that there have been 2 recent leaks to a member of the public in Long Melford. One of a draft council document, and another about yesterday's member briefing on Bellevue. Yesterday's incident, although I suppose not technically a leak, has resulted in a highly inaccurate post online, accompanied by a libelous accusation against me personally. The consequence has been a ramping up of the already extreme abuse and vitriol directed at me. We don't want to get to the stage where advance information about some topics can no longer be given to members. Frankly, it beggars belief that anyone here has so little respect for this council and can act in such an irresponsible and childish manner. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Councillor Beer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Disappointed to hear that, Councillor Ward, because unfortunately I was one of those members that were present here. Yes, I think there was only 12 or 13 of us, and obviously you're quite right to say what you've said, but that does infer, it can be any one of us. I can assure you, in all honesty, it certainly wasn't me, because I wouldn't even know how to operate YouTube, Facebook or Twitter or any of the others. I don't go there. But whoever it is, it's a great disrespect to this council, and it should not happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beer. Councillor Malvesi, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As the District Councillor representing Long Melford, I am standing here before you all to assure you that I did not leak any such thing. I am known for my integrity, and I'd wish it noted. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Councillor Lindsay.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I propose we move to the next item? I really don't want to hear every councillor standing up denying that they've leaked something.
We are about to. Okay, thank you. We're going to move to item 5 now, to receive notification of petitions in accordance with council procedure rules.
Thank you, Chair. Please be advised that we have received the following validated petitions. 20 valid signatures regarding planning applications DC 1901-422 and DC 1901-427, DC 1901-428 in Bures, and 20 valid signatures regarding planning application B 14-01103 and subsequent applications relating to the slaughterhouse site in Bures. These will be dealt with through the normal planning process.
Thank you. Item 6, questions by the public in accordance with council procedure rules.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Item 7, questions by councillors in accordance with council procedure rules.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Item 8, to receive reports from Cabinet members. I would like to invite Councillor Ward to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. You've got before you the regular reports from all of the Cabinet members. These reports cover the last few months for each of the portfolios, and you'll have had a chance to read through the reports, and this is your opportunity to ask any questions on the reports of the Cabinet members. Relevant officers are also here to provide background information as and where necessary. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So, CMU1, Cabinet Member for Assets and Investments. Are there any questions to this Cabinet Member? If there are no no questions, I'll proceed. CMU2, Cabinet Member for Communities. Are there any questions? Thank you, Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's a comment rather more than a question, although it could be used as a question. It's just that on this report and several of the other reports, there seems to be a 50-50 split almost between comments about what is going on in Mid-Suffolk and what is going on in Babergh. If the Cabinet Member represents Mid-Suffolk as well, then I could understand it. But as the Cabinet Member represents Babergh, why do we have to have items relating to Mid-Suffolk's activities in all of these reports? I understand from the Cabinet Member for Planning that it's useful to give us a comparison with what they're doing in terms of housing achievements and all the rest of it, and I can understand that. But quite honestly, I am not that interested in what happens at Willisham Village Hall and what's happening with the Gisling and the Silver Band and various other items which appear in here under the Mid-Suffolk sections.
Councillor Davis, is there anything you'd like to say in reply?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I actually totally agree with Councillor Hinton. I think it's a waste of our paper and the waste of the of councillors' time going through all this. I have spoken to the Assistant Director for Communities, and I think we'll see a different looking paper coming forward in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Any more questions regarding communities? Thank you. In that case, we'll move on. CMU3, Cabinet Member for Customers, Digital Transformation and Improvement. Are there any questions? If there are no questions, we'll move on to CMU4, Cabinet Member for Economic Growth. Are there any questions, please? Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a quick point in that under the old MPPF, it stated that development will be jobs-led. We can see that there is a figure in the annual monitoring report that 60% of new homes are being built are in rural areas. That's core and hinterland villages. how many jobs have we created in those locations, and what inward investment have we got, as the leader has actually gone on radio and said that the name of the council is important for identifying where it is and how we get inward investment.
I believe the councillor responsible for this paper isn't here today. Councillor Ward, would you like to speak to this, or can I ask an officer?
I think we'll come back with a formal response later, Councillor Hinton.
Thank you. Any more questions on this paper? Okay, in that case, we'll move on to CMU5, Cabinet Member for Environment. Are there any questions? In that case, if there are no questions regarding the environment, we'll move on to CMU6, Cabinet Member for Finance. Are there any questions? So there are no questions to the Cabinet Member for Finance. CMU7, Leader and Cabinet Member for Law and Governance. Are there any questions? Thank you. There appear to be no questions. Oh, sorry. Councillor Hinton.
Sorry about the late one there, but I was just checking something on the previous report. Just a quick one on the joint legal team at St Devonsbury, I believe, is where they're based. Have we sorted out the capacity problems in terms of staff recruitment, etc., down there? Because there still seems to be an enormous backlog in trying to get enforcement action in particular implemented.
The Chief Executive is going to answer this.
So there are no capacity issues within the legal services team. You're absolutely right, based in Bury St Edmunds, part now of West Suffolk, so that service provides both for West Suffolk Council and for our two authorities. They have reconfigured the legal services team since it was first created as a shared service, must be some 3 or 4 years ago now. That doesn't mean that they won't continually evolve and look at what services are needed as and when demand dictates the type of legal services that are required. But if the members are interested, we can get an updated report to you specifically about that service area and bring that forward if that would be beneficial.
Councillor Hinton, did you want to come
back?
back?
If I could just come back on that, Madam Chairman. Yes, it's because there was a particular case within my own ward where the officer or the legal representative concerned left the council. The work wasn't allocated to anybody else, and for over a year it sat somewhere, God knows where, with nothing happening to it, and it wasn't until I raised it that it was actually dug out of the woodwork from wherever it happened to have been, and was supposedly being acted upon, but nothing much has happened yet, so they work in an extraordinarily slow manner. When you consider what the Supreme Court's done in the last week or so, then that's a different thing altogether. The other point I would just like to make is a quick comment, and that was at the last district council elections, there was a problem in certain polling stations with the capacity of the polling boxes. As we have got a potential election coming up within the next X number of months, whatever it happens to be, can we make sure that polling boxes do have sufficient capacity and it doesn't require somebody sitting there with a ruler trying to shove the polling papers in to try and get them into the box? Because there's no doubt going to be a lot more parties on the list than there have been in the past.
The Chief Executive will again speak on this.
I think that's another one for me as returning officer. Yes, I think I'm working on the basis of weeks rather than months in terms of general election. We don't have an issue in terms of capacity of the ballot boxes, but clearly for a general election we would expect a higher turnout, and we will make sure that we have adequate capacity, as we did for the last general election as well. It may seem slightly antiquated, but much like the stubby pencil on a bit of string, the ruler to push in the ballot papers into the box is a commonly accepted practice up and down the country to make sure that the folded piece of paper maximises the amount of space, because otherwise we could have a lot of boxes with not very many ballot papers in them. So yes, that is common practice, but we will make sure inevitably that we have sufficient capacity.
Councillor Dawson.
She's done that. Speak.
Yes, I'm just wondering, in light of the electoral registration here, 3.2, whether that date can be brought forward, the revised list, because presumably the information we actually have now.
No, nothing we don't.
So no, the date of the publication of the register is prescribed to us, but following changes several years ago now, the way in which the registration scheme works is that actually it's a rolling scheme. So you'll all be familiar with receiving a Canvas document during the summer, which asks you, are your details still correct? Is there anyone to add to the register? But actually that process is a fail-safe, because registration takes place throughout the year, and the register is updated on an annual basis, on a monthly basis. So it will be at the point that the registration is called that the most recent register is the relevant one. But in terms of the formal publication, that is always at the beginning of December.
If there are no further questions, we'll move on to CMU8, Cabinet Member for Housing. Are there any questions? We'll now move on. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hinton.
Sorry if I'm reading all the reports and therefore coming up with some questions on them. Just one quick question based on 3.3 on page 55, where we're talking about a funding success to tackle rough sleeping. I can't find anything within the report which says exactly how many people we have got who are rough sleepers. I know we have a caravan or a bus or whatever it is that parks its way on somewhere on the bottom end of the Shotley Peninsula, but I think there are probably people coming out of Ipswich. But do we have any figures as to how many might be rough sleeping within Babergh itself?
Councillor Osborne, are you able to?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. In Babergh, we currently have no rough sleepers. There is an influx into mid-Suffolk, into Stowmarket. They've had a problem. We're not sure why. We think they're coming, obviously, from out of the district. We're not sure why that is happening, so that's being looked into. But we have actually recently set up a project for rough sleepers where we had that funding of 209,000, and some of that money has gone into an outreach officer for 2 days a week to work shared between mid-Suffolk and Babergh. So we're hoping that we can address this. Some of the issues with rough sleepers is they will not engage with our officers, and that's a real problem. And until they start to engage, we can't actually count them as a figure in the box, if you like. But even so, even if they won't engage, we are still endeavouring to go out and talk to them and try and get their problems resolved. Not at the moment.
Are there any further questions to Councillor Osborne? Councillor Mabry, thank you.
Try that one. Thank you very much. The rough sleeping, have we had any over the last 2 months, please?
The issue with rough sleepers is they come and they go very, very quickly. And as I've just said to Councillor Hinton, if they don't engage with our officers, then we can't count them as a statistic, as unfortunate as that is. Although, as I've said before, we do go out and help our best to work with them. Gavin, I don't know if you've got any more figures on that for over the last 2 months.
Councillor Mabry.
Yes, if I may come back on that, then thank you. I would be interested in the figures, because I actually had one in Great Waldingfield, which I found really strange, on the park bench opposite the post office, who I had to deal with. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? In that case, we'll move on to CMU9, Cabinet Member for Planning. Are there any questions? There do not appear to be any questions, but I believe Councillor Arthur would like to say something.
Just a couple of things. Most of them really are just to highlight items in the report and also to update a couple of things. Firstly, I will say that most of you have probably noticed there's quite a lot of mid-Suffolk information included in here. John Hinton mentioned it earlier on with regard to another report. I'd just like to say that I included it. It hasn't gone in by mistake. I've included it for two reasons. One, because I think the figures are useful for comparison purposes, and secondly, because we've got a joint local plan, so I think it actually is appropriate to include figures for Mid-Suffolk as well. The highlighting and updating, I'd like to just bring your attention to paragraph 3.3, just to reinforce that the housing land supply position for Babergh is 5.67 years. Over the page at 3.4, further to that paragraph, just to let you know that the annual monitoring report for 2018-19 now shows 579 completions for the year, and those of you that remember how far behind we were on annual completions in the past, I hope will welcome that. Moving on to paragraph 3.11 regarding the drop-in events. Just to let you know that I've today got the figures for those events, and across the two districts there were 811 people who attended the various drop-in events. And lastly, paragraph 3.12, just to highlight that to you, the cross-party member steering group will be beginning its work next month when obviously we've got the responses back from the local plan consultation. Some of those are already being assessed by officers now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Arthey. So that now completes this item, and we'll move on now to item 9, BC 1917, Overview and Scrutiny Committee report. I'd like to invite Councillor McCraw to introduce his report, which is for noting.
Thank you, Chair. The report before you, councillors, contains a report on the work of joint overview and scrutiny over the course of the last 2 months, these being July and August. Each topic has been given its own paragraph. I'll just briefly run through those. Joint compliments, comments and complaints is a process we've been following for some time. The Disabled Facilities Grant, again, is a developing point. You will have seen a couple of cards in your pigeonholes recently for one particular initiative which we would wish to see further uptake of, specifically that involving small adaptation grants. The committee felt this to be a positive thing. The Gypsy and Traveller issue has been shelved because it already is being done by a joint member task and finish group, and we have no wish to duplicate efforts from elsewhere. The Staff Turnover and Welfare report attracted some press notice, and I'd just briefly like to comment that the reporting of it that indicated that there had been a tripling of mental health problems in Babergh and Mid-Suffolk Council staff was, in my view, an inaccurate use of one statistic taken from one fraction of that report. I thought it was a disappointing analysis of what was actually overall a positive approach and a positive result for the general health and welfare of our staff, as it should be, and I found it misleading. In 19th of August, we commenced on a project we've been working on for some time, examining the funding, the value and the impact of the Citizens Advice Bureau, both on our citizens and on our own council services. That process continues now, and as the recommendations will show you, we have recommended setting up a joint working group. I think it has to be called a task and finish group, point of view of constitution. West Suffolk, Ipswich, and of course Babergh and Mid-Suffolk have already signed on to this task group, whatever. East Suffolk and SCC remain to commit to it, but we are still hopeful that process continues from now. And the 5-year housing land supply update speaks for itself. Where possible, I have quoted figures appropriate to just Babergh District Council, but obviously this is a joint overview and scrutiny committee, so we have to look at everything. Housing voids continue to improve to such an extent that we feel no further need to have a regular update. It's been getting longer and longer between updates, and since I believe the most recent figure for Babergh is about 16 days, is that correct? 16 days of voids time when we reached a peak of well over 70. It's been a success. And finally, the changes to the bin collection routes, again, it speaks for itself. This was asked for by members. We have now carried out that, and I will be reporting on that next month's meeting in October. The meeting took place on September the 19th, and it wasn't possible to pull together a report in such a short time. I'm happy to take any questions on any of those subjects, or either in the meeting or outside.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw, for that very helpful summary. Any questions to Councillor McCraw? I'd like to invite Councillor Hurren to move the recommendations on the agenda. Thank you, Councillor Hurren.
Thank you, Chairman. This is my first go at being chair of Joint Audit and Standards, and I have to say that I am quite enjoying it. A new role. I was transferred from overview and scrutiny after 20 years at great expense. Very interesting, maybe not quite as sexy, but very necessary after all. And I do have officers to back me up should I need it. This is the Joint Treasury Management Report covering the position at the end of the financial year 2018-19. It provides details of the performance, effects of decisions taken during that period, and confirms compliance with the Council's Treasury Management Policy. The report explains in more detail the factors affecting the strategy and activities, including the regulatory framework, economic conditions, interest rate and liquidity risk. Interest rates during the year continued at very low levels, even though the Bank of England rate was increased by 0.25% to 0.75% in August 18. The UK economy showed that GDP growth was 1.4% year on year, but it still faces a challenging outlook. We are continuing to operate in times of uncertainty, which is influencing sterling and UK markets. With the originally EU exit date of 29th of March now well gone, there is still much uncertainty surrounding the manner of the UK's departure on 31st of October, maybe. This will depend on the approach taken by the new Prime Minister and how the future relationship with the EU is finalised. There are also global economic uncertainty, whilst the US continues to be set on a path of trade policies and tensions in particular, but with the potential for this to spill over into wider trade relationships, most notably with the EU. More specifically for our two councils, with regard to banking activities, Mid-Suffolk operated within the daily bank account limits. However, Babergh exceeded ours by 1 day by 391,000. This was a result of a timing of a refund from a money market not being returned when expected. Each council reduced its short-term debt, Babergh by 5 million and Mid-Suffolk by 11 million. Both councils replaced that short-term debt with long-term borrowing, Babergh by 10.75 million and Mid-Suffolk by 38.2 million, to support the capital programme and at fixed rates to provide longer-term certainty. All investment activities undertaken were in accordance with the approved counterparty list. Both councils' investment activity, including average returns, can be found at Appendix C of the report, and investment by both councils in Fund and Circle has reduced as unallocated funds have been reclaimed. For Babergh, this was 208,000 of the 638k previously invested, and for Mid Suffolk it was 219k, down from 642. Funds will continue to be withdrawn as existing loans are paid off and alternative solutions explored. Both councils are compliant with the upper limits for interest rate exposure. The investment activity undertaken for the year was done so in priority order of security and liquidity over yield, as prescribed in the Treasury management strategy. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hurren. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Ward, thank you. Did you want to speak?
Thank you, Chairman. I would just like to say a few words. This is, I know, quite a dry report, and as Councillor Hurren said, not very sexy. It's full of lots of tables of numbers. In this chamber, we often have debates about what we do for our residents, why we do it, even how we do it. But this tells us how we are able to do it. And as such, is an incredibly important document, and I do encourage everyone to really try to get to grips with it. I know it's difficult, but it is very informative and actually quite interesting once you do get into it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. I can now open this up to question and debate. Thank you. Got it, John. Councillor Hinton, was that you wanting to say something? No? You're looking terribly eager for all the others.
not to be an accountant. It takes me a bit longer to get around these sort of figures. All I would just say as a comment as part of the debate is that I hope that we are watching the money markets fairly carefully, because when we're talking about over 100 million of debt, then we've got to be a bit careful about what happens to interest rates, because it makes a big difference to our repayments.
Thank you, Councillor Hinton. Would anyone else like to comment or ask a question? Councillor Maybury.
Thank you, Chairman. I would just like to know whether we received a penalty for going one day over our limit, please, in our Lloyd's account. Thank you.
As far as I know, not, but I defer to officers if that's any different. I'm
Councillor
sure we
Hurren,
didn't.
could you stand up, please?
Yes, as I said, I'm sure not, but I defer to officers if it's any different. No, Melissa has shaken her head, no.
Thank you. Any further questions? Right, in that case, can we take a vote for this report, please? All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you. Item 11, BC 1918, Babergh Sill Regulation 62 Monitoring Report. I would like to invite Councillor Arthey to introduce paper BC 1918 and to move the recommendation in the report. Thank you, Councillor Arthey.
Thank you. Yes, this is going to be quite brief. Council has simply asked to note the report and endorse it for publication. It sets out the latest position regarding the collection, allocation and expenditure of the Council's Community Infrastructure Levy for 2018-19. It provides collection and allocation related information from 11th of April 2016 to the 31st of March 2019, and Babergh's Regulation 62 monitoring report for 18-19. There's also information about neighbourhood sill allocations to the 31st of March 2019. The sill regulations require that the Council, as a sill collecting authority, produces a Regulation 62 financial report for each financial year. Appendix A is the Babergh Sill Regulation 62 monitoring report for 18-19, so it's something we have to do, and we've done it. Appendix B is for information and provides a summary of the neighbourhood sill allocations made since charging came into effect on the 11th of April 2016. And I will just remind you that all of this and a lot more data is publicly available on the website. Just to add a little bit more information regarding sill up to date and the size of the figures that we're talking about. For Babergh, the outstanding, they're called potential permissions, the amount there totals £11.4 million, of which £3.5 million has already been collected for implemented permissions, and another £2 million is due for more recently implemented permissions. And finally, just to remind you that we're going through a sill framework review at the moment, and there's a member briefing on that at 5:30 tomorrow afternoon in this chamber. So if you feel that you're not up to speed with the review, or perhaps even you're not informed enough on sill generally, please come tomorrow afternoon at 5:30. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Arthey. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Davis. So I'd like to open this up now for questions and debate. Have you got any questions? Yes, Councillor, thank you.
Thank you. I've just got a small matter as a sort of personal interest of mine in my ward, and as we're racing through our agenda, I thought I'd take this opportunity. Can I ask what action the council would take if a developer is very slow or late in paying their sill that they're due to pay? Would that be civil action, and what sort of time frame would they be given to pay?
Councillor Arthey, would you like to answer that?
Why is that? Yeah. I was desperately looking around for a little bit of help to answer that question. I don't know if there's a particular case that you're referring to. I know that there have been some situations where payments have not been made. On some of the larger developments, that's been quite costly to the developer because their phasing is no longer applicable if they don't make the first payment. So they've had to pay the whole lot up front. I think the best answer is if you can give me the particular case you're talking about, and I'll follow it up for you.
Thank you. I believe Councillor Maybury, did you have something you wanted to ask?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Looking through Appendix B, which is always good to have a look to see who's got what monies, what's allocated, what they can take. I'm just a little confused, and it's probably a printing error, but looking for the 5 parishes in my ward, which I hope Councillor Arthey can answer, is I can find 4 of them. The last one, a few from the bottom, I'm going to say, it says Waldingfield Parish Council. I'm assuming that's Little Waldingfield, and it's a printing error, but above it, it says Cornard Parish Council. And I'd just like to know exactly which parishes they are, please. Thank you.
Is that a detail that we can answer now, or is that something that would be better to get back to Councillor Maybury on?
The normal answer to the question would be, I think, that Little begins with an L and Great begins with a G, so the 2 Waldingfields will be in different places. However, all of the information for all of the parishes is available on the website. It's available on Excom, and I actually have the pages open here. So if Margaret Maybury would like me to, I can go through all of the relevant parishes with her immediately after the meeting. Her parishes are, of course, my parishes too, because we share a ward.
Thank you, Councillor Arthey. Councillor Maybury, did you want to come back on that?
Yes, thank you. It's just that I'm looking, and I think this says Levenheath Parish Council, and then Lindsay, then Long Melford, then something Cornard, and something Waldingfield. Well, if that's supposed to be Little Waldingfield, that should come before Long Melford. Thank you.
Well, I think Councillor Arthey has offered to speak to you about this after the meeting, so I think we'll deal with the detail then. Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's not a question, actually. It's a statement. I think this is a really good news story. It's great to see our town and parishes benefiting from this money that's coming in their direction. You know, if they've got a neighbourhood plan, they get 25%. If they haven't, they still get 15%. And it's really doing well. And as well as the bids that they're putting in, some have been successful, some haven't, I believe. But it's just one of those really good news stories that I think needs to get out there and be circulated much more than it is. I know that Sudbury, for example, looking at the figures here, they've got a lot of money and they're using it very effectively and efficiently. So well done to all officers and members concerned.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Any other comments or questions? Fine. In that case, if there are no more comments or questions, all those in favour of the report, the recommendations in the report? That's carried. Thank you. So now we'll move on to item 12, BC 1919, timetable of meetings 2020 and 21. Rather than raising any queries on any of the dates mentioned in the timetable, any queries should be emailed to the corporate manager for democratic services for consideration and brought back to the council at a future council meeting. I would like to invite Councillor Ward to introduce paper BC 1919 and to move the recommendation in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm not going to spend too long on this. It's exactly what it says it is. It's the timetable of Council, Cabinet and committee meetings for the municipal year 2020 to 2021. And I'd just like to propose a recommendation that this draft timetable for 2020 to 2021 be approved by Council this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. So could I have a seconder? Councillor Osborne, thank you. We're not having a debate then on this, so we're going straight to the vote. Those in favour? Thank you. That appears to be unanimous. Thank you. Now we'll move on to item 13, councillor appointments. I would like to invite Councillor Ward to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just one appointment. We need to appoint a member to the East-West Rail Consortium and Councillor Michael Holt as the Cabinet Member for Economic Growth is going to be appointed to this external body. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have a seconder there. Councillor McCross, thank you. Sorry, did you want to speak, Councillor McCross?
I did actually as well.
Please
I'm quite happy to second it, but I take an interest in rail because I'm a regular user. And
stand,
sorry,
please.
I apologise, Chair. East-West communication in this country has always been difficult. Crossing East Anglia is not as easy as it should be. Can I ask if that's the purpose of the East-West Rail Consortium? Thank you very much. In that case, I'm more than happy to continue seconding.
Thank you. Can we take a vote on this, please? Thank you. That's carried. Now we'll move on to item 14, motion on notice. I would like to invite Councillor Malvesi to move the motion. Councillor Malvesi, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I ask the Council, do you see the document before you? And it's one sheet of A4. And would you like to take it as read? I believe that the motion sits alongside the climate change motion that this council passed. The one goes in hand with the other. It's important that we have a balanced biodiversity within our community because it keeps us alive. So does council want me to read through the elements?
No. You can if you wish, but everyone has it in front of them, so it's
so I
not necessary, but fine. Thank you. May I have a seconder? Councillor Norman, thank you. Did you want to speak, Councillor Norman? Thank you. Please speak.
No, yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to obviously thank Councillor Malvesi for bringing this forward, this much needed motion. You know, she's correct. Obviously, the biodiversity in our community is what keeps us alive. And it's vitally important that we protect that, especially when it comes to sort of things around developments and wildlife corridors as well, making sure that there's provision for those and that we're looking after them in every way that we can. I believe that the creation of the wildlife network map, which is proposed in this motion, would be really useful for both the council and residents, as it will help identify essential wildlife corridors, which will allow us to make practical, informed decisions about these wildlife corridors and identify where we could possibly make more and things like that, which I think would be really useful for the community, as it is something that has been practiced at other councils, such as Ipswich, who have a big wildlife corridor map, which has been really useful for me, particularly as the ward member for Sproughton and Pinewood. As I'm so close to Ipswich, it does incorporate some of my areas, but not all of them. So it would be really useful for the council as a whole and residents. I also think the Trees for Life scheme as well, which obviously makes sure that we can keep up with our ever-changing environment as a district, as it is changing a lot at the moment with a lot of the house building. So making sure that we keep the fabric of our district, which, living in rural Suffolk, has always been very rich in biodiversity. I think it's very important to keep that. So it gives me great pleasure to second this motion, and yes, just thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Norman. Councillor Arthey.
Yeah, I'd actually like to congratulate Councillor Malvesi and the Green Group on this council for the way that they worked together to arrive at a suitable form for the pledges in the motion that we can all be happy with. Well done to both of you, or all of you, should I say, because there are a few Greens here somewhere. Thank you.
Chair, can I just clarify, Councillor Jameson will still have to move the amendment because actually we're still debating the original motion at the moment.
Councillor Jameson, would you like to move your amendment if you still wish to do so?
Yes, thank you, Chair. First, I'd like to thank Councillor Malvesi for the initiative in bringing both July's climate emergency motion and the biodiversity motion forward before the council to discuss. Biodiversity emergency is obviously something that's often overlooked because of the climate. Everyone concentrates on the climate emergency and they don't think about the biodiversity emergency, as Councillor Norman mentioned. With this motion, in principle, we fully support the first 3 points, and we have no problem at all with points 1 to 3. We just felt point 4 needed strengthening a little bit if we're going to be serious about the climate and the biodiversity emergency. We just wanted to be a little bit more specific around what money is going to be spent, what money is going to be spent on, and where the resource is coming from. So we've added altered point 4 slightly and added a point 5. Point 4, we've said specifies where the additional resources may be necessarily, and some wording, and this is exactly the same wording as agreed unanimously by Mid-Suffolk in July on their biodiversity motion. And point 5, which is the new bit, gives us the opportunity to allow us to act quickly if an opportunity arises. For example, if a bit of land becomes available, we could purchase it to use as a wildlife in area. I can read the 2 amended points, but you have those in front of you, if that's okay, whichever you prefer.
I think everyone's got the amendments in front of them, but perhaps you'd like to draw members' attention to just the items of change.
I'll say item change is point 4. We've altered point 4 slightly and added point 5.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Malvesi, do you accept
You
this?
need to second it first.
Oh, sorry, yes. Sorry, I'm looking for a seconder for the amendment. Councillor Hurren, thank you. Did you want to say anything, Councillor Hurren?
Present time, Madam Chairman, no.
Thank you. Councillor Malvisi, do you accept this amendment?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I accept the amendment at item 4, that additional biodiversity resources be provided as necessary to support the task force, provide more input to supporting planning officers, strengthen the role of the public realm team, and provide advice to parishes and other community landowners. And the additional item 5, any funding to maintain and improve the biodiversity of our area for 2019-2020 will be recommended to Cabinet for approval. The task force would recommend the amount to be spent in future years in a report back to Cabinet by March 2020, and I accept those amendments.
Thank you, Councillor Malvisi.
Thank you.
So now we will go to debate on the amendments and the original motion. Thank you, with the amendments. Councillor Arthur.
Do you want me to repeat what I said earlier on or not? But congratulations to all on working together to get the final version, which we have in front of us. Thank you.
Beautifully timed.
Thank you, Chair. There's only one point I wanted to add, and it refers to part 3 of the original motion. And Councillor Norman referred to it in seconding the original motion about the relationship with the Tree for Life, and it sort of slightly related it, in fact, to housing development, and in fact, I think it's more related to births. And that's a crucial point. It's been a very successful programme in Mid-Suffolk. I think it's been appreciated. And the great point is that it's an option for people to take up. They don't have to do it. Not everybody has a garden available for them to plant a tree in, but a tree can be planted on behalf of every child born. And it would be good for that to take place in Babergh, as it does in Mid-Suffolk. And I think it's a very nice motion.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Councillor Horan, did you want to speak?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just a question, really. Could this be appended to our joint local plan? Because it does make a difference to that. It affects what you do in planning. Corridors affect housing estates, and it's just difficult to have one without the other, I feel. It should almost be written into our emerging local plan, I would feel, as it makes difference, in my opinion.
Oh, Councillor Malvisi.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Councillor Horan makes a very valid point. We did make a reference to the local plan and the need for planners to bear in mind climate change, on the climate change, and I believe that these two motions actually go together. Thank you.
Chief Executive wants to...
I can see Councillor Arthur quickly leafing through his copy of the joint local plan, but I'll say what I'll say, and then he may well, by which time, found what he wants to say as well. So just in terms of the ability simply to append this to the local plan, no, only because, as you will appreciate, the development of a local plan is a ridiculously complicated process and has to make sure that it goes through the relevant hoops. However, we are, as you heard earlier, at the close of the current consultation phase of the local plan, and clearly this can help inform, alongside the other consultation aspects, any revisions to the policies that come forward at the next stage of the local plan. So it can certainly be taken into account and built in, but the mechanics of exactly how that happens will need to be considered carefully to make sure that we comply with the processes we need to comply with in terms of developing local plans. I don't think I've waffled long enough for Councillor Arthur. Oh, good.
Yeah, thank you for that. The thing that I think I ought to say is that it's definitely not contrary to the provisions of the local plan. And if you have a look at policy LP17, which is the biodiversity policy, it's an LP policy which is for the determination of planning applications. And in there, and I had it a minute ago, now I've lost it. Oh, isn't that dreadful? I should have highlighted it. But anyway, it certainly isn't contrary to the provisions of that policy, which talks about somewhere planning positively for the creation, protection, enhancement and management of local networks of biodiversity within wildlife corridors, linking to green infrastructure networks and areas identified by local partnerships for habitat restoration and creation. And there was F, it's policy LP17F, the development's primary objective is to conserve and enhance biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I agree with what's been said about the local plan. It is important that this is considered within the local plan. The original MPPF had a provision for protecting existing ancient woodlands, for instance, and hedgerows, and isolated ancient trees and hedgerows, which seems to be missing from the latest version of the MPPF. And if you chop down an ancient tree and say, well, it can be replaced by some new ones that we're going to put in, it doesn't do much for the carbon footprint for a long, long time. So it's important that we maintain what we've got rather than just move it around and say, well, look at the good work we're doing by putting in these new trees. If you've taken out some old trees, it doesn't help the environment at all. And I know that in one particular application that springs to mind, an ancient oak tree, probably a couple of 100 years old, and an ancient hedgerow that goes with it are proposed to be taken out purely because it gives visibility splay, but they will be replaced by new plantings further back from the road. Well, yes, but it's going to be a long time before they contribute anything to reducing the carbon footprint.
Thank you. Any further comment or questions? Councillor Malvisi, did you want to respond to anything that you've heard this evening?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Not really. I did read somewhere that we've actually got more trees now in our country than before the Industrial Revolution, but I don't have the fact and figures to hand, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. So in that case, we'll go to a vote on the proposal with the amendment. Can we take a vote on this, please? I believe that's unanimous. Thank you. So we're coming to the end of the meeting now. The date of the next meeting is 22nd of October 2019 at 5:30, followed by the extraordinary meeting at 6:30. So I now close the meeting. Thank you all very much. Thank you and good evening.